World of Warcraft has seen some very dark times. Content droughts, design fiascos, scandals, systems too complex for their own good, and radio silence as community engagement hits an all-time low. And now Final Fantasy XIV and other competitors are closing in. But I don't think this has to be the end of the story for World of Warcraft. What World of Warcraft needs is simpler systems, more content, better community engagement so that the dev teams know what will get players excited to pick up World of Warcraft again. To that end, I have invented a system of my own, a simple system that gives players huge amounts of customization, that lets developers add awesome and useful abilities without fear of spellbar bloat, giving players the ability to upgrade 3 of their spells to be something new. I'm cooking up concepts for 7 of these upgrade spells for every spec. Some of them are returning favorites, some of them are brand new. Either way, Blizzard has my express permission to use every concept I post about in these videos in the comments or on the forums. And if the Blizzard developers are too pressed for time to engage with the community, then I will. I'll get the feedback on this concept, and even if they don't take a single one of my ideas, they'll know what the players want, and most importantly, why. And they can use that to make the game better, because I want this game better. I want WoW to last another decade. I was cooking up these upgrade concepts one class at a time, and I literally got halfway through with them when I got around to Druids. And by the time I got through balanced Druids, I realized that almost every spec in the game works on a resource system of building resources and spending them. Sometimes the resources are something a bit more subtle, like hot streak procs or arcane charges. Sometimes it's more obvious, like rage or combo points. Healers are about the only exception to this rule, and even they manage mana. And as a Holy Paladin player, I'm an exception to that exception. Cute little aside there, but anyway, I felt like I had found my groove around the time I got around to cooking up upgrades for Druids. It was a pretty good routine of keeping an eye on Icy Veins and Wowhead, picking 2 to 4 abilities from the spec's main rotation and another ability or 2 that I thought would look cool, then run out of ideas, scour the list of spec and class abilities on Wowhead for 1 or 2 more abilities I can upgrade, come up with something so that I can consistently have 7 upgrade abilities per spec, copy what I can get away with copying from one spec to another, rinse and repeat. I think what I have for Druids is interesting, and at least a good starting point for discussion. There are plenty of returning abilities, some more Master of Nature flavor mixed in, but after rereading this and making some tweaks to my first draft, I realize I actually made some hilariously boneheaded mistakes. Some of those mistakes are even the kind of mistakes that a Blizzard developer might make. But I can tell you right now, I am no Blizzard developer. In fact, you could have told me that. Because the fact that I'm admitting to a mistake is a dead giveaway that I'm not a Blizzard developer. Anyhow, I know there are more mistakes I've made, but I need your help correcting them. So let's get right into it and see what I came up with for the first iteration. The first upgrade for balance is Freya's Wrath. It's an upgrade for Wrath, obviously. It deals less damage per target, but it sends out a volley of bolts to deal damage to multiple targets, and it uses the older green lightning projectile for Wrath. The second upgrade is Starbolt. It's an upgrade for Starfire that deals more damage, but it deals it to a single target, and it uses a purple projectile. The third upgrade is Astral Storm, which is an upgrade for Starfall. It is an astral power consumer, and it deals more damage, but it deals it in a more limited target area. Also, Astral Storm will morph into Hurricane during solar eclipse and into Starstorm during lunar eclipse. The fourth upgrade is Lunar Strike, and it's an upgrade for Moonfire. It has a cast time, and it deals additional upfront damage, and it still applies the Moonfire damage over time effect, but it contributes to Eclipse the way Starfire or Starbolt would. The fifth upgrade is Wild Mushroom, and it's an upgrade for Sunfire. It deals more damage over time than Sunfire would deal, but the source of the damage is not a debuff on enemies. It's a stationary mushroom instead, Effects that benefit from Sunfire damage ticks benefit from ticks of mushroom damage, and as long as enemies are in the area of effect of your mushroom, they have a chance to receive shooting star damage. The 6th upgrade is Headwind, an upgrade for Typhoon. It knocks enemies backward and creates an area of directed wind for 10 seconds. Enemies walking against the wind are slowed by 50%, and allies walking with the wind are sped by 100%. This has a 45-second cooldown. The last upgrade is Mana Flare, and it is an upgrade for Solar Beam. It interrupts targets every second, preventing them from casting magic in the interrupted school for 5 seconds. It also deals astral damage to enemies who are successfully interrupted. Plus, we have 2 more upgrades in the back pocket for you to evaluate and see whether I should have put them in with the others or not. The first one is Star Clusters, which is an upgrade for the Shooting Stars passive. Shooting Stars individually do less damage, but anytime any of them trigger, your current target also takes damage. The second upgrade in the back pocket is Healing Touch, an upgrade for regrowth that has much more upfront healing and applies a small heal over time effect and generates astral power when you cast it. Now we get into the thinking. And yes, I brought back quite a few older abilities in these upgrades. Wild Mushrooms once were a source of multi-target damage before Sunfire was invented, and I figure sacrificing mobility for damage is the kind of trade-off that upgrades should provide. Of course, it's not going to be optimal in all scenarios, but then again, upgrades probably shouldn't be. When I saw that Starfall was the multi-target astral power spender for balance, instead of being a wide-range DPS cooldown like it used to be, I was a bit surprised. I wanted to see if I could bring back Hurricane and Astral Storm, so I brought those back as alternative astral power spenders. I don't hate Starfall in the least, mind you. The trade-off here is a narrower area for greater damage. Sometimes that'll be worth it, sometimes not. To be honest, though, having the Astral Power spell morph into the old Returning Hurricane spell, or the spell I just made up for this Starstorm one, that was just me trying to make it a little more flavorful. I haven't actually thought of any objective benefit to having Hurricane or Starstorm, or any benefit to having Astral Storm stay Astral Storm by casting it outside of Eclipse. I don't know, maybe there should be some benefits. Feedback, as always, would be much appreciated here. Now, I saw that there were plenty of parts of Valence's single-target rotation that hit multi-targets, and plenty of parts of its multi-target rotation that hit single targets. I have done upgrades for other classes that took multi-target abilities and made them single-target, and that took single-target abilities and made them multi-target. I did that with Starbolt so that Starfire could function as a single-target ability if desired, and so that Druids in World of Warcraft could look a little more like Druids of the Talon from Warcraft 3, who had purple projectiles as their basic attack. And I wanted to do something similar with Wrath, partly to bring back the old green lightning bolt animation, and partly because I wanted it to be able to contribute to multi-target damage. At first, I took a stab at making it a bit more nuanced than just doing multi-target damage straight up. And you can tell from the fact that I doubled back and made it a straight-up multi-target ability that I failed. And I should probably tell you in what way I failed. I looked up the tooltip for Eclipse on Wowhead and on Icy Veins to see how it worked, and got entirely the wrong idea. I figured that casting Wrath twice, even if you're in Solar Eclipse, instantly triggered a Lunar Eclipse. And I also figured that casting Starfire twice, even if you're in a Lunar Eclipse, instantly triggers a Solar Eclipse, and I should have been able to realize that, hey, if I were actually right about that, then Eclipse wouldn't actually work at all or ever buff more than 2 casts of the same spell. I need to rethink my understanding of this. Actually, it took watching a video of a balanced druid in action, thank you Mom's Dead, by the by your accent is adorable, to realize my mistake. But what does this colossal misunderstanding on my part have to do with what I originally did for Wrath's upgrade? Well, it's another case of too clever by half meets derp. In order to try to buff multi-target damage rotation in a clever way, a nuanced way, a way based on my incorrect understanding, I set up the original version of the Wrath upgrade so that only 1 cast was needed to get into Lunar Eclipse. That is an uninteresting and minuscule buff. Once I realized that, I said to myself, Stop overthinking it. Stop trying to be nuanced and clever. It's not working. Just do the simple, obvious thing. In other words, I did what Blizzard should have been doing since Legion. So here we are, with an upgrade that turns a single target ability into a multi-target ability. Simple, to the point, not really nuanced at all. Brings back the old animation for a little nostalgia, even if the original animation was a single target and this one isn't. Oh well. I named it after Freya because she had an avatar in Sholazar Basin that cast a Wrath Volley spell, if I recall correctly. Now, I'm prepared to make changes if Druid players prefer having both single target and multi-target abilities in the same rotation. Feedback is going to be what drives how these upgrades will evolve. But if you do have me erase these single versus multi-target upgrades, I would very much appreciate ideas for what to put in their place after they've been removed. Now, whenever I do these upgrades, I tend to make sure I go off the beaten path at least once or twice. If I'm inventing upgrades for a healer, I make sure I have some utility and or damage abilities upgraded too. And if I'm inventing upgrades for a damage dealer, I aim for some healing or utility abilities. Headwind is an example of that. Typhoon was an ability that, when it was introduced back in Wrath of the Lich King, actually made me pretty jealous. It was a knockback. Knockbacks were new and exciting at the time, and paladins apparently weren't cool enough to get one. Anyhow, I gave that Typhoon upgrade some more utility by making it one more button that increases the speed of your raid as long as they're going in the right direction. Mana Flare is another utility ability, and it is one that's borrowed from Warcraft 3, actually. There was a Night Elf caster called the Fairy Dragon, and it had a Mana Flare spell that was a channeled multi-target area of effect ability. Any casters that use magic while the Fairy Dragon was channeling Mana Flare would take damage. I figured Solar Beam was the perfect utility spell for this upgrade, and while it will still keep targets from casting, it won't do it in quite the same way as Solar Beam, and it'll do some damage to boot. Then we have star clusters in the back pocket. I was starting to run out of ideas. I seem to always do that towards the end of most specs, but anyhow, Star Clusters upgrades the Shooting Stars passive that provides bonuses to dots by trading multi-target damage for single-target damage. There's still going to be some multi-target damage, but some of this multi-target damage will get redirected to your main target. And after writing all that, it dawned on me that, hey, this only really helps with single-target damage if there are a lot of targets around to trigger Star Clusters. That is situational at best. Kind of seems like one of the kind of effects you'd see on a suboptimal legendary where you take one look at it, compare it to an actually effective legendary, and say to yourself, no thank you, won't even consider that legendary. Then again, I'm not an expert here. I'm just a guy who thinks someone ought to get player feedback and thought, why not me? So I did put this in my back pocket, and in its place I came up with Lunar Strike. I took the failed idea for Nature's Wrath, that's what I called it before I switched to Freya's Wrath, and decided to turn Moonfire into a kind of a pseudo-Starfire that applies the Moonfire debuff. I figure it's at least worth it for single-target DPS, but if there's a better way to do this upgrade concept, please do let me know. I'm well aware that Starfire got called Lunar Strike for a while. I figure, why not recycle the name? Though, I have a multi-target version of Moonfire for Guardian Druids. If feedback tells me to switch to that multi-target version of Moonfire away from Lunar Strike, then I will. Finally, I added Healing Touch to the back pocket, mainly because Feral and Guardian had the Healing Touch upgrade. Just in case this looks better than the Headwind or Mana Flare utility upgrades, I can switch it in. I added the perk that it produces Astral Power to make it less punishing DPS-wise when a DPS Druid stops to heal. I definitely made some mistakes with my first draft of Balance, and I have to admit I'm a tad suspicious of what I have now due to those mistakes. I could really use some feedback from Druid players to help me sort out the good from the bad and to fix or replace the bad so that it's good again. Now, when I started out with these upgrade concepts, I went ability by ability, not purpose by purpose, if you see what I mean. I asked myself, which abilities exist in this specs kit that I can give an upgrade to? And when I created upgrades based on which abilities I could upgrade, I often aimed for something that I thought looked or sounded cool. Almost always I wanted the upgraded ability to feel at least a little bit different from the original. Often I tried to create some kind of trade-off, making the upgrade situationally useful based on things like the number of targets affected or having a stronger effect with a longer cooldown, things like that. Rarely did I upgrade the same ability more than once for the same spec, but while I was putting together each spread of upgrades, what I didn't do, and what I probably should have done in retrospect, was to figure out what goals a player would have while they're looking at a list of upgrades, and then make sure upgrades exist in the spread that allow the player to pick upgrades that help them achieve those goals. In my next iteration, I plan to have that design goal in mind, to consider what the player wants to accomplish and how they could accomplish it with the upgrades. I strongly suspect that in this next iteration, there will be a lot more cases where I upgrade the same ability in 2 or more different ways. That will give players more options, and since that's going to be the goal with goal-oriented design, who knows? I might even have 3 different upgrades for the same ability in the end. However, I can do this much more effectively in an environment that has a great deal of feedback available, and that's where you come in. You have knowledge that comes from experience with these specs. I don't. I tried to do my research on Wowhead and Icy Veins for each spec, but inevitably there'll be things you know that I don't because you have experience that I don't have. You'll have more and better ideas than I could hope to have, and I know I need those, so please, let me know what you think of these upgrades and what better ideas you have for what to put in their places. Looking at the balance upgrades through the lens of what purpose would a player actually use this for, I think I've done a fairly decent job. If someone wanted to buff their single target DPS, then they'd pick Starbolt, Lunar Strike, and I suppose Wild Mushroom. I mean, Wild Mushroom is multi-target, but, it deals higher damage. I suppose not every single target rotation needs to be devoid of multi-target damage abilities, though with what I've done with most of my upgrades, you'd think I was some kind of purist who thought that only single target damage abilities should be part of the single target rotation, and only multi-target damage abilities should be part of a multi-target rotation. If you were going into it to buff multi-target damage, then Freya's Wrath, Astral Storm, and, again, Wild Mushroom would probably be your picks. Of course, Sustain versus Burst isn't really being represented here, though maybe that's okay. Feedback would be appreciated here. Even if I'm justified in patting myself on the back for this first iteration of balance, which I may not be, only experienced druids would know for sure, I only got it by luck of the draw. I made the mistake of thinking of these upgrades in terms of which abilities I can upgrade and how I can upgrade them, not in terms of what goals players have when they go into these upgrade spreads looking for something to upgrade. Of course, I know Blizzard probably won't take many, or even any of these suggestions. Heck, they might even have something objectively better in store for us than the semi-borrowed power upgrade system that I've cooked up here. But knowing what gets players excited will be helpful to them even so. That is why I'm sacrificing so much of my free time and energy on Project Decade. And who knows, they might just need these ideas to get WoW going in the right direction. Heck, if this video series just gets the Blizzard developers into the habit of creating a blue post with the thinking in it that goes in-depth enough for us to understand what they're doing and what their design goals are, then that would be a huge step forward. Even saying the thinking out loud is sometimes enough to get you a new perspective on what you're doing. Is it really what people want? Does it serve the purposes that it really should be serving in the end? Am I really doing something just to make a system look awesome instead of making the game overall better? What does it do for the fun factor? Am I making the mistake of prioritizing my design goals over the fun factor? Are my design goals the right design goals to have? Do my ideas match the spec's feel and flavor? Is it a net gain? Is it genuinely awesome? Things like that. Plus, we just plain need more communication from Blizzard. If Project Decade gets the development team into the habit of telling us the thinking for every change they make, then the whole project will have been worth it, even if they don't take a single suggestion. Again, if you see something you don't like bad trade-offs or something you know is counterproductive or useless, Or if you've thought of an idea that's better or cooler or more useful than mine, then don't hesitate to let me know. The more details you can provide about why you don't like it and what makes one of my ideas counterproductive or useless, or about why your idea is cooler or more useful than mine, the better. One of the main goals of Project Decade is to give whoever's in charge of class design and player power systems a good idea what appeals to players and what'll actually get them excited to get back to WoW again. And the more you can say about the wherefore and the why, the better. I fully intend to iterate on this project and make changes in response to feedback. I know I'm going to make mistakes. Heck, I've already seen mistakes in some of the things that I've done. But if those mistakes generate the kind of discussion that Blizzard needs to hear, so much the better. Blizzard needs to see player engagement, humility, and feedback actually making change in action so they can start doing what needs to be done to turn WoW around. It can be done and it should be done. World of Warcraft can last another decade. So keep the feedback coming, folks. There's one last thing. I began working on Project Decade videos back in July, and considering how many months it has taken, the fact that there are 36 different sets of feedback to curate and compile, and multitudes of decisions to make based on feedback received, ideas others have come up with, and how to weave everything together into a fun, functional, and exciting whole, I don't have a chance in the tramaculum of getting this done in any reasonable length of time unless I get volunteers to help me curate and compile the feedback I'm getting. If you're willing to help curate feedback, please let me know. If I get enough interest, I will set up a Discord server where we can coordinate everything. Thank you in advance for your feedback and support. Let's make World of Warcraft the best game that it can be.